This is my long-term user review of the Sony a7 IV. This camera is absolutely fantastic. Many people have been praising this camera for a long time, but as a long-term user of this camera, I purchased it as a pre-order and received it on essentially day one and have been using it as one of my primary cameras since then. I wanted to share my thoughts and opinions on this camera. I've talked a lot about this camera in the past. I even created a getting started guide and a full course on utilizing this camera. So if you are an a7 IV user and you want to learn everything that there is to know about shooting fantastic images and video with this camera, then make sure to check out the link in the description below to my course. So let's talk about what I'm going to include in this video. I'm going to talk about the overall build quality, design, and styling of this camera, its performance, and give you some examples of how I've utilized this camera. I'm going to talk about some of the features that I think are unique and great about this camera, and then we'll have some concluding thoughts at the end. So let's start with the build and the design. As a Sony user who started with the a7S, the first generation of the a7S, love the fact that the camera has a little bit more to hold on to. And they've continued to refine the ergonomics of this camera over the years. And I think it's gotten to a really nice place where it's comfortable to hold. Now, it is a little bit small of a camera body as far as its height for my hand. But one of my fingers just kind of trailing down below because I can't get all of them on the grip, but that's okay. I love the ergonomics of this camera because it gives me a lot to hold on to and it feels secure in the hand. All the buttons are nice and easy to reach. All the dials, primarily on the right-hand side of this camera, are simple to use. This year, they did go with a toggle here that allows you to switch between different camera modes. So photography mode, video mode, and then S&Q mode. And there's a lock here as well, which is really nice. And that makes it easy to get into those modes instead of having to switch the mode dial and rotate the mode dial all the way around to whatever shooting mode you were looking for. I love that. On the exposure compensation switch, there's also a lock. So if you're using a shooting mode that utilizes that, very easy to lock and unlock that. At times, I've actually remapped this to the ISO, so I could change the ISO on my camera with this because I typically don't use exposure compensation, being that I'm shooting in manual mode. But all of these buttons are really nice and easy to get to. On the back of the camera, we've got the standard buttons and dials as well, very easy and accessible. And on the side, we've got the memory card door with 2 memory card slots here, which is great. Most cameras in this price point are moving to dual card slots, but it's not a common thing in the past to have dual card slots. Another recent change, but not just for this camera, is the tolerances on these camera strap attachments here. These used to dingle dangle around quite a bit and make a lot of noise, and I used to always have to remove them from the camera because when shooting video, I would hear them bouncing around in my video. But they changed the tolerances and now they don't bounce around, which is really great. The only annoying thing is when it's down like this, you kind of have to push it out of the way to get your memory card door open. Down below, we've got the same battery that we've been utilizing, the Z-style battery, which gets great battery life on this camera. I never run into issues with battery life, even shooting bigger jobs where I'm out for hours and hours shooting video or photo. Typically, I can get through things on one battery unless it's only video and I'm shooting tons of video. I usually have to dip into a second battery. It's very rare and the battery life is fantastic. As far as the doors over here, we've got a full-size HDMI port, which is something that's new. No longer do we have to have these HDMI adapters. We have a full-size port, which I have a love-hate relationship with. Full-size HDMI cables going into your camera can be a bit of a pain unless you have nice, slim HDMI cables, which I had to invest in because we went back to a full-size HDMI port. But when using an external monitor, like an Atomos recorder or something like that with this device, which I do use quite often, having just a single HDMI cable with the same ends on both sides is definitely nice. We have our microphone jack port right here for plugging in external microphones. We have our headphone jack right here, which I don't quite understand why it needs such a big door, but it has a big door. Then we have our USB Type-C and our multi-port Here, our USB Type-C supports charging, and we can charge this camera fast. Even when shooting 4K video, and I've used this camera in a live streaming environment as well, where it was running for hours, having power plugged into it, electricity running right into this camera keeps the camera charged faster than it burns electricity, which is great. So if I wanted to run this camera long term for live streaming an event for several hours, plugging it into power, I know that the camera is going to stay topped off and I'm not going to have to worry about the battery running out, even if I'm running things for hours on end. So I love that feature. Now we have the articulating display here as well. A lot of people really liked that articulating display. I love the fact that on the A7R5, we have both the articulating and the tilt display. I don't like being stuck with just the flip out display. I like the articulating display for when I'm shooting photos and I have the camera in front of me. I want to be able to look straight at the screen and straight through the camera. I don't want to be looking off to the side with some little, flip out screen that's off to the side, kind of cockeyed, and I have to kind of angle it so that it seems properly angled. And to me, I don't like that experience. But having the articulating screen on the newer camera, the A7R5 and the flip out screen together is the best of both worlds. I assume maybe with the A7 V they will bring that, but we have the flip out screen right now. So all of the ergonomics and everything on this camera have just continued to get better and better. So let's talk about the performance. I talked about battery life a little bit already, so I jumped ahead of myself. But as far as performance goes with photos, this camera is one of the best in the market for its price point. It is fast, it is accurate, the autofocus is just right on par every single time. I don't have to worry when I'm shooting with this camera because I know the combination of this camera with a good lens, I'm gonna get sharp photos every single time, and my autofocus is going to achieve that for me. Now, I don't just use the full wide autofocus. I typically use the selecting point autofocus that allows me to select points on the screen. I talk about that in my course, and I've talked about that on other videos on this channel, but that just helps the camera better decide who to focus on when I don't allow the entire sensor as the autofocus area, but I just have the little point zooming around, and then I use the D-pad here on the back of the camera to move that point around, or of course I can even tap and have it track focus as well, which is a great feature. And the focus tracking on this camera is just second to none. It is so good. So at this point, I've taken thousands and thousands of photos with this camera, and I've shot a lot of video as well. With the camera that I'm looking into right now is the Sony FX3, but often I am also using the A7 IV as my main camera because it's so good and the performance is great and the image quality is great. The autofocus, everything is just sharp, and it has all the features that I need for shooting video. Really, the only reason I'm shooting with an FX3 right now is because it's easier to get audio right in. But you can actually get the audio handle or the handle from the FX3, and you can use it on a camera like this because it has the multi-interface here. But performance on this camera is really unmatched. I also have the Sony A1, and there are things that are a little bit better about the Sony A1, but the lines are really blurred. And if you're looking at maybe needing one or two cameras because you're shooting professionally, two of these A7 IVs is a much better option than one A1, just because of having the redundancy of two cameras, and then also just there being so many great features in this particular camera. Now, in video, it shoots great video. It shoots 4K 60, albeit there is a crop in on the 60, and people have been very critical over that crop. However, I don't find the crop to be that bothersome to me. I'm not often switching back and forth between 60 frames per second and say 24 or 30 frames per second and being bothered by the fact that I might need to back up a little bit because I'm shooting at 60p. It's just not a big deal to me. Anything that I'm shooting, nobody is going to know the difference whether or not I was shooting at 60p and the crop is a little bit different. It's just not a problem. And if it is a problem for you, chances are you probably need to step up to a higher end camera. Most people that are going to be shooting with a camera like this, that crop is not a big bothersome to them. But if you are in a professional environment where that crop is going to make your image look different and you're concerned about that, then you really need to put on your adult pants and purchase a camera that is more in line with what you're trying to achieve. I don't play into the whining and complaining about some of the limitations that Sony may have put on this camera. Sure, they probably could have done it without a crop, but they decided not to. And there are cameras that are more expensive that don't have a crop. Maybe that's the only reason that they did it, but they are the ones that made the camera and they made that decision. So we're just gonna stick with it. Performance though, 60p, absolutely great. Yes, I do wish that it had 120p. 120p would be fantastic, but 60p is great in this price point. Now, as far as performance, have I had any issues or situations with this camera that's left me frustrated? Well, there are times when the camera is a little bit slower than my A1. My A1 is fast. It processes images fast. It's a little bit faster at shooting, and the autofocus at times can be a little bit snappier. But that's really my only thing to compare it against, and my only complaint is that I have a better camera that's higher end that, yes, is going to perform better than this camera. This camera has not left me high and dry in any situation that I've been in so far because it is a workhorse and it performs so well. The camera is fast, the battery life is great, and it achieves everything that I need it to do. And if it doesn't have the feature that I'm looking for, then I go to a higher end camera. So let's take a look at the new menu system that came with this camera. This is one of the first cameras to receive the new menu system, and Sony has been moving over to this menu system as they have updated their cameras. I absolutely love this new menu system with getting in and changing things in the shooting menu, in the exposure, the focus. All of these menus are set up and laid out much better than the old system, and I adapted to it really easily. So the menu system is great, and the options that this camera provides are absolutely fantastic, especially now with the ability to change image qualities in RAW and not be stuck to just one RAW image size, but actually have multiple RAW image sizes as well is great, because one of the biggest complaints that I hear from people who still shoot JPEG is that RAW takes up too much space. Well, shoot a smaller version of a RAW image and you'll be just fine, and you'll have all the flexibility that you would in a large RAW image. So I love that feature, and of course Canon and even Nikon has had that for a while. Sony finally brought that to their cameras. So other features that I utilize from time to time is the Imaging Edge app on my phone. I like to use that for syncing images over from time to time, and sometimes even remote triggering the camera. Using the imaging app over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connected to this camera is great because it provides additional information for your files, and then also additional functionality for your camera. So I like shooting connected to my phone via Bluetooth because it'll use the GPS data on my phone connected over Bluetooth to write that GPS data to files, which is great for images, especially for search engine optimization and websites. And so having that geo-located data within your image file is great. And you connecting it to your phone, whether it be an iPhone or an Android phone, is really easy to do. Controlling your camera through the imaging app is great as well. Being able to remotely fire or even change some of the settings on your camera from within the app are excellent features that I like to use from time to time rather than having to get up and go over to my camera. So I currently have 2 of these cameras, and I have 2 of them because I've been moving my platform over to full frame cameras where I was utilizing other cameras in my studio setup that were crop sensor cameras. And the A7 IV has become my standard camera for my B and even my C cameras there. But I find myself taking these cameras out all the time because I don't like to take my A1 out and put wear and tear on that camera when I'm just going out to shoot photos for enjoyment or photos of my kids or photos of sports or different things like that. I'd rather put wear and tear on my A7 IV. The autofocus tracking is great, and I've never been left lacking because of the autofocus on this camera. It's absolutely fantastic and pretty close to what my A1 is capable of. So I don't use my A1 as often because I don't want to put the wear and tear on that camera when my A7 IV is going to produce. Nobody's going to be able to tell the difference between the image captured on the A1 and the A7 IV. And when I understand that, I recognize that I don't need to go out there with a very expensive camera wielding that around for absolutely no reason, risking causing damage to that camera and just general wear and tear, the A7 IV is absolutely perfect for that. So I find myself utilizing the A7 IV cameras both for photo and video much more often because they're super capable cameras. They're better priced and they have the majority of the features that I need the majority of the time that I'm out shooting. So would I be purchasing one of these cameras here now that these cameras have been out for a little while? Yes, I find the A7 IV still to be one of the best cameras that's on the market as far as a hybrid camera goes that shoots photo and video. For the price point, you can't beat it. I always recommend to people, rather than spending a ton of extra money on a camera body, that they get a camera body that does what they need it to do and that they spend more money on lenses. I'm huge on the G Master lenses. They are absolutely fantastic. I have a variety of just regular G series lenses, and I have some aftermarket lenses as well. And I always go back to my G Master lenses because they work so well with this platform. So if you're considering a camera and maybe even considering a higher end Sony camera, I highly recommend looking at the lenses that you have available and deciding, should I perhaps get the A7 IV instead and spend some more money on lenses, because I think that would be a better option for you. I've got a link to this camera and some of the lenses that I use most often down in the description below. Make sure to check out that course I referenced earlier on so that you can get to know your A7 IV much better. If you haven't picked one up yet, use the link that I have in the description below. It helps support the channel and I greatly appreciate it. If this video helped you out, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you back in another one soon. Take care.